If you want to get stronger in calisthenics, one of the biggest obstacles you'll encounter is fatigue. If you don't learn how to manage it properly, you can find yourself stuck on a plateau or even injured, so learning how to manage it is essential for long-term strength gains. But before we talk about how to do that, let's talk about what fatigue actually is. Fatigue is the disruption to body systems that occurs with all stimulative training. This means that fatigue is unavoidable. If your training is making you stronger, it's also generating fatigue. The only way to completely avoid it would be to not train hard, but that would be throwing the baby out with the bathwater, because by avoiding fatigue, also avoid getting stronger. Just like you can't make a delicious meal without some mess, you can't gain strength without fatigue, so both of them go hand in hand. But what actually causes fatigue? There are 5 different fatigue sources, but before we get into them, I want to give you a quick disclaimer. This is going to be some sciencey nerd shit, so it isn't critical for you to understand, but it's nice to get a broad overview of what fatigue actually is and where it comes from. The 5 fatigue sources are metabolite generation, recompartmentalization, substrate depletion, muscle, joint, and connective tissue damage, and neuroendocrine disruption. I know all of these sound really complicated, but I'll try to explain them to you as simply as possible. Metabolite generation and recompartmentalization means that you generate metabolites such as lactic acid, which go in various cell compartments and prevent muscle contractions. Substrate depletion means that you deplete various substrates, ATP, glycogen, and neurotransmitters. Muscle, joint, and connective tissue damage means that you damage and break down your muscles, joints, and connective tissues. And neuroendocrine disruption means that over time, anabolic hormones such as testosterone decrease and catabolic hormones such as cortisol increase. This was just a broad overview of the factors that cause fatigue, but at least now you have some basic understanding of where it comes from. Now let's talk about the fitness fatigue paradigm. Strength training causes an increase in fitness, your underlying ability to generate force, but it also causes fatigue levels to rise. And when training is hard and frequent enough to promote the best gains, fatigue per session is so high that it doesn't fall back down to 0 before the next session. It accumulates, which is called cumulative fatigue. So how well you actually perform is called preparedness, which is fitness minus fatigue. In order to actually get stronger over time, your preparedness has to rise. So you have to prevent needless fatigue accumulation while maximizing stimulus and bring fatigue down when it inevitably accumulates. This is actually one of the biggest reasons people plateau. They simply have accumulated so much fatigue that it overshadows their fitness. But how can we know that fatigue has accumulated and we need to bring it down? There are many different fatigue indicators that you could look at to detect fatigue, but the most important one is an inability to exceed or at least match your previous performance. If you're unable to increase the load when you're supposed to, while also not excessively increasing your RPE, your fatigue needs to bring down your fatigue before training again. But how do you do that? Before we talk about how to decrease fatigue, let's talk about proactive fatigue management, or in other words, how to prevent it from getting needlessly high in the first place. Here's a quick list. Sleep, eat, and relax enough. Choose high stimulus to fatigue ratio exercises. Keep your technique sharp and only use the intended muscles. Don't train too hard or too much early in your mesocycle, and take enough days off during each week. But even if you excel in all of these, you will accumulate fatigue nonetheless. So let's talk about reactive fatigue management, or in other words, things you can do to decrease your fatigue when it's gotten too high for further productive training. The 4 main things you can do are technique sessions, technique only half weeks, deload weeks, and active rest phases. A technique session is a very light session where you just work on your technique, and it consists of sets of 3 to 6 reps at an RPE of 3 to 6. It lets you drop fatigue while slightly increasing your fitness because you're improving your technique, which is awesome. A technique only half week is just like the name suggests, 3 to 4 days of technique sessions. A deload week is a whole week of technique sessions, which is usually taken between mesocycles or about 4 to 6 weeks of hard training. And an active rest phase is either 2 deload weeks or 2 weeks of not doing anything training related. Each of these buy you different amounts of productive training. A technique session buys you about a week. A technique half week buys you about 2 to 3 weeks. A deload week buys you about 4 to 6 weeks. And an active rest phase buys you about 6 to 12 months. Technique sessions and technique only half weeks are usually taken when you feel like you won't make it through your mesocycle, but deloads and active rest phases are usually pre-planned. Now let's talk about some common mistakes that people make fatigue management wise that are not so wise. The first is not eating, sleeping, or relaxing enough. Listen, if you're looking to get stronger but you don't have your recovery under control, that's the first thing you have to fix. No amount of advanced training programming will help you if you're not able to recover between sessions. The second is overdoing the loading jumps and reaching high RPEs too soon. This would be like doing 6 weighted pull-ups with 10 kilos at an RPE 7 in week 1 and increasing the weight to 20 kilos in week 2. The load increase is simply too huge, so your RPE will rise too fast and you'll be forced to take an early deload because once RPE 10 is hit, there's nowhere to progress further. The third is doing excessive amounts of volume from reaching MRV too soon. This one is very obvious. By doing too much volume, you'll accumulate too much fatigue and have to take an early deload. The fourth is taking days off instead of doing technique sessions. Some people just don't know that technique sessions are a thing. They think that you either train hard or you don't train at all. The fifth is improperly applying fatigue management strategies. This would be like taking an early deload when a technique half week could have done the job, or doing a technique session when you clearly need to take a deload. The sixth is never taking active rest phases. Just like with technique sessions, a lot of people don't know that active rest phases are a thing, and even if they do know, it's because they got injured by skipping them. You should take an active rest phase at least once a year to let your joints and connective tissues fully heal up, especially if you're into doing a lot of straight arm work that puts tons of pressure on them. To end this video, let's summarize everything we just talked about. Firstly, fatigue is the disruption to body systems that occurs with all stimulative training. Secondly, there's no strength training without fatigue, so instead of avoiding it, you have to learn how to manage it. Thirdly, since your fatigue and fitness increase at the same time, your underlying ability to produce force is called preparedness, which is the difference between your fitness and fatigue. Fourthly, a plateau happens when your fatigue overshadows your fitness. Fifthly, there are many fatigue indicators, but the main one is a decrease in performance. Sixthly, there are 5 things you can do to accumulate as little fatigue as possible. Sleep, eat, and relax enough. Choose high stimulus to fatigue ratio exercises. Keep your technique sharp and only use the intended muscles. Don't train too hard or too much early in your mesocycle, and take enough days off during each week. And seventhly, there are 4 things you can do to decrease fatigue when it's getting out of hand. Technique sessions, technique only half weeks, deload weeks, and active rest phases. And just so you know, I got all of this information from Renaissance Periodization's Advanced Training Methods course, which is basically a college course that they put on YouTube for their channel members. All I did was I summarized everything I learned and tried to apply it to calisthenics. If you want to learn more about it, I would definitely recommend you to become a member of their channel, because this course is pure gold for strength training. All of my recent videos are basically everything I've learned from this course, so you can just see how valuable it is by looking at my recent videos. I really hope that you found this video helpful and that you now know what fatigue is, where it comes from, and how to deal with it. If you do, I'd really appreciate it if you left a like, subscribe to my channel, and comment down below any future video ideas that I should consider. You can also check the description for the best 9 bodyweight exercises for beginners and my Instagram, where I post my daily workouts and lifestyle in general. And have an awesome day. Peace!